You're listening to Straight from the Drafts. I'm your host Nao, social media strategist, business cheerleader and chronic oversharer. In this weekly voice note from me, you can expect actionable insights and behind the scenes stories, my best tips and all the encouragement, all with the goal of helping you plan your content with confidence so that you can turn your goals into reality with the support from your social media. So grab a drink, pop in your headphones and let's get into this week's episode. Safe to say that this week's episode did not go to plan. You may have noticed that last week the podcast took a break. I had a spontaneous week off, and that's because last week I was in a car accident. Today's episode should actually have been a podcast blog of my workation. I'm not sure what the word is for a podcast. Audio blog? Audio vlog? I don't know. It should have been that of the workation that I went to in Spain. So before I get stuck into the rest of this recording, let me share the first and only clip from the airport that actually ended up getting recorded. It's not even 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm sat here with a chocolate croissant, a Diet Coke, and my alarm went off at a time that began with a 5 today, which can only mean one thing. I am at the airport. I imagine the sound quality is not going to be the best, but I thought I would do a podcast vlog, I'm not sure what the right word is for that, of my workation week, inspired by Alice, who I am actually spending the week with. Well, we've actually only got a 24-hour crossover before she needs to fly home for something exciting, but Alice did this on book launch day, and I thought, how fun! So by the time you hear this, I will be back from the workation. I'll try and keep you posted as the week goes on. We'll see how far this goes. I have never done a working holiday before, but I'm looking forward to it. Bit nervous about the journey. Don't mind flying on my own, that's absolutely fine. But I have got a hire car at the other side, and I have never actually driven abroad before, so that will be a first. But we can do hard things, we can do scary things. So I'll let you know how that goes. I don't think I will try and record while I'm driving. That might be a step too far, but I will check in with you once I arrive safely at the other side. So wish me luck. Now, this episode won't just be focused on the accident. I do want to chat more generally about sharing stories versus sharing trauma on the internet. But while we're here, I might as well give you a bit more context of what happened. So, as past Nao already told you, I was hiring a rental car for my journey from the airport to the villa, where I was meeting the rest of the group. So they'd headed out to Spain a few days earlier, but because of weddings that I was attending, I was joining the group late. There were options to get buses or taxis, but it was slow and taxis were going to be expensive. And I was being impatient. I wanted to arrive as soon as I could because I was already a few days late. So I thought, right, I'll hire a car. 2 of the group were also travelling back literally the following day. So they very kindly suggested that they would return it to the airport, which would also make their journey back easier too. So it literally only needed to be hired for 24 hours, which meant I could get it for an absolute bargain. I did, however, opt for a slightly upgraded option, which waived the excess. It meant I didn't have a hold on my card, and there was like breakdown cover and that sort of stuff included, along with other bits and bobs. But still, it was very good value for money. So I'd Google Street Viewed the journey, and it looked relatively straightforward. If it had been like really hilly, windy country roads, I'm not sure I would have attempted it, but it looked relatively normal, sort of motorways, roundabouts, etc. And I had managed an hour of what was going to be an hour 20, an hour 25 journey when the crash happened. All the motorway driving was done. And then I got to this sort of double roundabout situation. And there were roadworks. I was going through these roadworks super slowly and the car flipped. And I'm not saying I flipped the car. I am saying it like intentionally that way around. The car flipped because I cannot express how confused I was as it was happening. It did happen completely in slow motion, but there was no impact or crash that sort of preceded the flip. It was just this bizarre sensation that all of a sudden the car was rolling and I was suspended upside down. Music was still playing, then my Apple Watch was buzzing at me saying crash detected, and it was phoning the emergency services for me, which honestly, what a godsend. And then I was surrounded by other drivers. None of us seemed to have a common language between us, so it was this weird chaotic mix of hand signals and Google Translate. But thankfully, as I say, I was moving slowly. It was a pretty busy road, so I was not left upside down for long, and the other drivers helped me to sort of clamber out of the car. And as far as I could see, I just had a few scrapes and bruises from the windscreen glass sort of shattering. And honestly, I was so preoccupied with all of the people surrounding me, asking me if I was okay, realising that the Spanish emergency services were actually speaking to me from my watch and figuring that out and trying to speak to them, and going into complete panic that that accident was going to financially cripple me. I had no idea how thorough the insurance was at that stage. I thought I'd picked a pretty good option, but, you know, who knows in that moment what it actually meant in reality. And we've got our wedding next year, and just all these things were just flying through my head, and I was feeling so proud of myself that I'd done the motorways and the drive had gone very smoothly. And I kept saying to myself, you can do hard things, you can do hard things. And it was just a moment of, no, you can't. And my self-belief has for sure been crushed by this incident. But I will say, I should point this out at the beginning of the story, no other vehicles were impacted. Everyone else at the scene was fine. Like, there were no injuries, casualties, anything like that. Everyone else just stopped to help, which I'm very, very grateful for. Even more grateful, the girls that I was meeting for the workation, without hesitation, when I sent them the message to say, I am delayed, I have been in a car accident. That's not actually what I typed because my hands were shaky, so there were a lot of typos, but they did translate the whole thing. They, without hesitation, left the villa and came to my rescue, roadside. The police and a tow truck had arrived by that point as well. And then from then on, it was just 36 hours of admin chaos, essentially. To summarise, we ended up back at the crash site. Over 24 hours later, we went to the police station. We had to sort some paperwork and pay a fee to get the car released back to the rental car company, essentially. Out of all of the phone calls that I made, I was accused of being drunk or asked if I was on my phone. It was probably the 5th or 6th phone call with the car hire people before anyone actually asked if I was okay. The whole thing was a bit of a shit show. But I was lucky to be near a police station. That meant that they arrived quickly. I was lucky to have been on a busy road with plenty of people around to stop and help. And I was lucky that I was actually moving very slowly when it happened, so there were next to no injuries. But my God, the admin and, the headspace that it took up for a good while. Anyway, the end of the story is that the upgraded insurance option that I'd gone for meant that the only things that I did have to pay was that fee to the Spanish police to release the car back to the rental car company. And I also decided I would pay for dinner for Ellie and Mary as an apology and a thank you for all the disruption that I'd caused and all the running around that they'd done for me across that 36 hours, which of course they were adamant that obviously that was the bare minimum of being a good human, but in my eyes they went completely above and beyond, and I will forever be grateful to them. And I did stay for the remainder of the trip till last Friday, so I stayed for a few days. Still managed to do a little bit of work and make some lovely memories, despite the drama. And when we were sort of just chatting the day after, while there was still admin to sort, Ellie suggested a really great topic for my next podcast episode, which is this episode, and that's navigating things like this in content. Because truthfully, I could have put out an episode last week. It actually rained most of Tuesday and I'd packed my microphone. Of course, I was going to do the little vlog thing, so there's no real reason, logistically at least, why I skipped last week. But if I'm honest, processing the accident, however minor the outcomes actually ended up being, or they might seem in hindsight, that actually took more out of me than I expected. And so on Tuesday, when I could have found the time to sit and put a podcast episode together, I thought, why? Why am I putting that pressure on myself when yesterday I was literally upside down in the car? Like, is it really that important? Is anyone going to care that much if I take a week off the podcast? So I let myself off the hook. And so when Ellie suggested the concept for today's episode, I just absolutely loved it. So all credit to her for this. The reality is I've needed a week of processing, hugging my family, and knowing that the whole saga is actually properly over before I could talk about it online. I am such an oversharer, so I do have to catch myself sometimes, and I think the fact that I really didn't feel ready to jump on my stories right away and share what had happened was quite interesting to me. I did put out a post on my grid which was quite high level and vague, and I did hover over the post button many times before I actually hit share, because I think there's a line that's very tricky to spot between sharing stories because we want to and sharing stories because we feel obligated to. There's that line between exploiting ourselves, our stories, our trauma for content because we know personal content performs well, and actually genuinely wanting to share the lessons, the outcomes. And I did worry when I posted about the accident, that sort of vague grid post that I've put out. I did worry, and kind of even now as I'm talking about it, what if people think I'm being pick-me or milking it for attention, for views? What if people thought that I was being vague on purpose because I was trying to get them to ask me more details in the comments? It's tricky. And I actually had a conversation with a friend as well who, they were really poorly a couple of years ago, life or death poorly. And it meant that her business totally hit pause. And she was saying how she finds herself, now that she's sort of out the other side of that, wishing that she had more photos or videos from that time to be able to create that sort of storytelling content, and also how she kind of hates that. And it's so true, isn't it? Because when you're in those low points, of course you don't want to document it. But then later you think that, oh, I've not got any befores for a great before and after post. And it's such a strange position that we've got ourselves in. Storytelling has always made the most impactful content, and we're in a real era right now of craving authentic connection and not just showing the shiny stuff all the time online. But when does that go too far? Because I think there are so many reasons why sharing these stories is powerful. Not just the fact that people connect with stories, but personal content always performs really well in the sense that it gets a lot of engagement and reach. I think in a lot of cases too, it can provide really good context. So if you're really passionate about something because of your past, your experiences, then knowing that story will allow people to connect with your brand on a much deeper level. If you were facing a problem and created the solution, and that solution is the business and the brand that you're talking about, then that's a great brand story that is so memorable. It could also be purely inspirational. It could be really healing for others to hear your story and resonate with that. Another business owner just yesterday shared a really personal story of theirs, and it's something that they'd been struggling to hide in their content, but actually up until this point it felt too painful for them to talk about online. And there were loads of comments in a really supportive, loving way saying, you don't need to hide this, you can always be your full self. But actually, if it's painful to share, if it's painful for her to talk about, then of course she has every right to filter that out of her content and avoid those conversations on repeat. I had such a slither of that last week where I just wanted to be off my phone, like I couldn't be bothered to tell the story again, or, people very genuinely, in a very lovely, understanding way, were asking what had happened. And yes, I'd kind of put that out there as this happened, and almost, does that invite questions? Does that invite follow-up? And it was really, really lovely to get all of that back, but it is also overwhelming. And this business owner that I was talking about, who shared her story yesterday, she absolutely will be an inspiration for so many, having now shared that, because it was to do with a health condition that I'm sure a lot of people have or know someone who has that. And yeah, they will feel seen and inspired by her sharing it so publicly. But is that her obligation to share? Just as someone who has a bit of a platform and has that health condition, is that an obligation for her to talk about? And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, way before this accident, because I know there's a few business owners right now who look kind of shining from the outside, but the reality behind the scenes is their business is kind of crumbling. They're not paying their suppliers, or they couldn't afford their team, but that's not necessarily the story that's being told in their content. But do they owe us, their audience, their customers, that transparency and honesty? As business owners, should we be sharing our struggles for everyone to see, purely so that they don't feel bad about themselves, or so that they know that they're not alone? Again, it's tricky, and I don't have the answers. I don't think there's a black and white rule book when it comes to this stuff, and I won't sit here and say that, I wanted time to process my car accident, but in the same breath, if X, Y, and Z is going through a tough time in business, then they should share it, because otherwise they're fake. I don't think it's as clear as share business stuff but keep personal life private, especially when you're a solopreneur and it often all blurs into one anyway. I do think morals come into it if you're using these stories, whether good or bad, to sell your expertise or sell your program, and you're really rewriting the truth or missing key parts of the story. That doesn't really sit right with me. That feels a bit like false advertising. I think that's where people emphasising six-figure businesses, where actually it might be six-figure revenue with thousands of pounds of losses and debt, that's a bit icky to me. Maybe just don't shout about the financials at all, rather than misleading. But as I say, I don't have the answers. I think this episode is more just an invitation for some reflections, some thinking, some discussions. So there's 3 things that I would say to wrap up this episode. Firstly, your stories are yours to share. You choose the timeline. If it's something that you document in the moment and share later, something that you talk about with 0 video or photo evidence to look back on, or maybe it's something that stays purely private to you and your close circle. That is your choice. Second, remembering that if you're creating your own narrative, others are doing the same. They're filtering out the parts that they don't want you to see too. Not necessarily because they're toxic or fake, but maybe they're just processing. Maybe they're scared of being judged, because if people see their failures, then they might not want to buy from them. The reasons really are none of our business, but I think it's just good to remember that online is never a completely accurate view, even if that creator is an oversharer or usually super transparent. And the third and final thing, wear your seatbelt and get the good insurance. Last week has made the last 11 years of paying car insurance feel oh so worth it. And obviously we're ending today's episode with a cheesy quote, and what to choose after such a big week, but I'm going to go with one that controversially I have actually already shared, because I think when we see happiness online, or success. We assume that everything is amazing behind the scenes, and I will probably be sharing smiles and sunshine from my week in Spain, but that doesn't diminish the way that I was feeling and still sometimes have moments of feeling in between it all. So interpret this as you will, but for a second time, this week's cheesy quote is, "Joy is not the reward for getting through tough times. It's the method." And with that, I hope you have a gorgeous rest of your week. I hope to see you again next week. No more spontaneous breaks, but yeah, I'm sending you extra love today. So I'll see you soon. Bye.